So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever or whenever you may be. This is the overnight. I am DM Foss. Tonight I'm going solo, so it might be a little rambly and all over the place. Just bear with me, please. Um, so, tonight I was going to talk about the ATF. And what I was going to go over changed a little bit because they put out the changes, how they want to change the definition of some things. What a firearm is, a receiver, and then they get in the ghost gun. And there's links to what we're going to talk about in the description. The first link is kind of what got me thinking about the ATF. It's an article I read about in the New York Times about the ATF. And then there's a link to the proposed changes where you can comment, because I believe the comment period is open. And then there's a link to the history of the ATF, according to the ATF. And I'll touch on that briefly here in just a bit. Kind of hit highlights. There's a lot of stuff, so I'm not going to cover everything. And then we'll just kind of see where we ramble on to. Hang on just a second. How you doing this morning, G?
Yeah, fair to Midland. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, no problem. It makes it easier for me. Helps me keep focused on what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's difficult to have to just keep talking. Well, your tendency is to want to just keep talking, and that is never a good idea. So yeah, happy to help
out. And then also before we get started, Andrew Carmichael out there, he was one of the winners on one of the giveaways. Needs to email me his address so I can send him out some stuff. You can email me at here. I'll put it here.
It was when you were using the StreamYard thing, the random thing, right?
No, I did it through one of the other online things. It's kind of, I think it was just before I found out about the.
I remember it being a random thing, I guess.
Yeah. So, Andrew, email me at that address and I'll ship you out some stuff. And let me know if you want a extra large or double extra large shirt. That's the only sizes I have. I got most of your stuff already packaged and waiting, so I just need your address. I'll get it sent out this coming week. So, back to the ATF, we'll go over kind of a brief thumbnail sketch of their history, because I don't think a lot of people know actually where they came from and why they are. They just know that they are. So on the ATF website, they kind of trace their lineage all the way back to 1789, which they didn't actually exist, but the act of July 1789 was a tax on imported spirits to help pay for the Revolutionary War. And then in 1862, Congress created the Office of Internal Revenue. 1863, they hired 3 agents to investigate alcohol tax dodgers. And that's kind of where you could say the beginnings started. There's actually people doing enforcement. Um, then we'll jump to 1919, the Volstead Prohibition Enforcement Act. That gave responsibility of enforcement to the Office of Internal Revenue, and created the prohibition unit for investigating and enforcing taxes again. 1927, you get the prohibition unit changes to the Bureau of Prohibition. 1930, the Bureau of Prohibition is moved from the Office of Internal Revenue to the Justice Department, as they're starting to do enforcement. It was thought they would better fit with the Department of Justice.
Right, they're like
1930.
expanding their responsibilities and obligations. So from being a regulatory, now they're having to enforce the infringements of the regulations, or people that aren't abiding by the regulations have to, basically they're creating a bunch of rules that when people break them, it's a bunch of burden on the local police or the local investigations or whatever. So they're like, hey, how about you enforce your own laws? Right.
Yeah. And then within here, there's other things that happen, different acts that were established, but I kind of skipped that because they're not key moments, I didn't feel. But 1933, the Bureau of Prohibition was changed to the Alcohol Tax Unit. They kind of reorganized and changed the name. And in 34, you get the National Firearms Act. And that was to regulate and tax machine guns, silencers, and sawed-off shotguns. And that was kind of a reaction to the summer crime wave because of prohibition. All the gangsters, bootleggers, and all that stuff. 1938, you get the Federal Firearms Act, and that was to regulate interstate firearms and ammo. Sorry, I can't quite see my notes. They're behind my camera. Prohibits felons from acquiring firearms. Requires dealers and manufacturers to be licensed, and then impose firearm markings and record keeping. This is kind of where you see what people think that ATF does now. In 41,
That's where you get FFLs from the Federal Firearms Act. That's how you keep them straight. You got your NFA, National Firearms Act of 1934. So, National Firearms Act is the big one that made machine guns illegal, basically, and messed with us. The FFLs come from a couple years later. This firearms or Federal Firearms Act that you just talked about, and that's where we get the, oh, wait a minute, we can't ban every gun. Well, then we got to ban all of, we can ban these amount of guns. Okay. But a couple years later, they come back and go, well, of the ones we couldn't ban, we got to do all this. We can't let felons have them. We can't let the shipments of them go between states without regulation and basically paperwork, making sure we know where everything is. So I guess I bring that up because since 1938, they've potentially had gun control or controls in place that should have ended crime, and they didn't end crime. So that's all.
Yeah, and just the whole reaction was to really what was a short-lived, a very just 6 months. All the Bonnie and Clyde and all the gangsters that you hear about, that crime wave was like one summer. And then you get all these laws and regulations that come out of a reaction to that short period of time.
In a time when the police jurisdictions were like a county line or a state line, and there was no radios in police cars. Police cars existed. Cars were like, this is the 30s, so cars were fast and big, made out of steel. You could steal a car real easy if you knew how to do it, and that's what the criminals did. And they knew if you got across a county line or a state line, the sheriff or the whoever it was would basically stop. There was nothing they could do. If they made their siren loud enough, maybe another police officer would hear, but that didn't mean they knew that they were in a pursuit and to come running. So bank robbers and stuff perceivably could just outrun police and be scot-free. And the dime store novels didn't have cowboys to emulate and to become the cowboys were the superheroes of the day. So they didn't have cowboys anymore. They used the criminals, the gangsters. They souped them up and made them stylized them and made them into superheroes, basically, novel heroes, whatever you want to call like those heroes in the novels. And everybody got worried. Oh no, there was no such thing as like police unifying to stop people. They thought crime was going to be out of control, or at least they made this fun at that.
Yeah, and during that time, like stealing cars, a lot of cars didn't even have locks. They didn't have keys.
Like on your honor. Nobody thought about that stuff. So you could literally, if you just had bad intent, you could do it. You could just do mean stuff, and nobody really thought about that yet.
And police radios were just receivers. So I don't know when the two-way receivers came in, but back around that time, you could receive a call and then you had to go find a phone, whether it was one of the police boxes or you stopped at somebody's house if they had a phone. So you could call in and talk to the dispatcher.
Yeah, maybe the restaurant or the library or wherever you knew there was a phone, depending on what time we're talking here in what county or whatever. But yeah, it was definitely a time when the bank robbers knew, or whatever kind of criminal prohibition created organized crime. So there was a lot of new stuff happening that police had to deal with. But you're right. That's an interesting facet of it, is that it all did happen. And at that same time, suppressors were invented, right? So all of a sudden now guns have this perception that you can quiet a gun. And if someone knew somebody with a long barrel 22 short and they put a suppressor on it, they might have the perception that all guns could get that quiet.
1938, there was another Federal Firearms Act.
That's the one we were talking about. That made the FFLs, basically.
41, the Alcohol Tax Unit was commissioned to enforce the Federal Firearms Act. So they were given the authority to enforce it. Then we'll jump all the way to 68, and you get the Gun Control Act. The Alcohol Tax Unit is reorganized once again into the Alcohol Tax Division. And the Gun Control Act was kind of another big one.
Yeah, that's actually like a couple of years worth of little things that they finally just said, let's just call it the 68 Gun Control Acts or something. So it's a real mess to try to keep track of, but it was a whole bunch of stuff happening after all the assassination.
Yeah. Then we'll jump to 72.
But basically the thing, they're like, well, we have tobacco and we got to tax it, right? And now we have alcohol because that's what we're here for. And then there's these guns, we're also going to tax that. But then they're like, well, nobody's just doing whatever they're supposed to. So we also have to enforce all this stuff. So they're being bounced around between this is all the executive branch of government, but it's being bounced around between basically accountants, lawyers, and police.
So 72, did I cover 72?
This is where we're at.
That's when they were changed to the ATF. That's when it became that alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And they were given the functions, the powers and duties in regulating alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. That's when they were given, that name and then that power, which they kind of had before, but another reorganizing name change, and then giving that set, the power to do those things. And then 2000, we'll jump 2002, the ATF is transferred to the Department of Homeland Security. So it's folded into that after kind of 9/11, response to 9/11. And then there's some jumping back and forth, which I kind of skipped, where either what the ATF was or the kind of proto ATF was moved from from the IRS to Department of Justice to the IRS to the Department of Justice to Homeland Security, and kind of moved around based on what they thought the organization should be focused on. Kind of, that's what it seemed like, whether regulation or investigation or enforcement. And then I couldn't really find where the tobacco part comes in. It's not, there's nothing listed on their history, but specifically says this is when they started looking after tobacco. The only thing I could really find was 1791. There was a domestic tax on alcohol and tobacco, the Act of 1791. But nothing that says these powers are given to this organization at this time. So I'm not exactly sure where they consider the tobacco part to be a part of it, but that's kind of a minor point.
Yeah, I knew that they started with alcohol, and I don't know when they. I guess it says in 1862, Congress created the IRS, or the Internal Revenue Department, inside of the Treasury, specifically to collect taxes on highly lucrative tariffs on imported distilled spirits and tobacco. So by 1863, tax evasion and organized crime had become so widespread that Congress authorized the hiring of 3 detectives to investigate alcohol tax evaders. And this is all from their ATF website. So it sounds like right off the bat in 1862, it was tobacco and distilled spirits.
So that's kind of a real rough thumbnail sketch of their history. And like I said, there's other things that I kind of left out just because we could do at least the 3. What was that?
Because you have to. There's a lot. There's like, it's a
Yeah.
weird kind of like patchwork, right? It's like the ATF is a bush, and there's a whole bunch of it that's roots, and a whole bunch of it that you can kind of see, and then there's branches to it, and there's a lot to it.
Yeah, because that would be at least a 3-hour chat you could fill, probably more, and we're trying to cram this into an hour. So, but
I've known a couple of people, and what's interesting, what I never even thought about until I knew this one guy who really knew a lot of ATF agents, is how many people join the ATF as like an accountant or to do something with alcohol for whatever reason. They're there to do an alcohol business, and then they get stuck in the firearms division, or vice versa. That maybe they hate cigarettes and they're there to do that, and all of a sudden they're doing guns their whole career. And I guess that you notice that happened.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting, and when I was reading through that, the pencil pusher section, people that just investigate, or I don't remember what part of the department it's called, but they don't have badges, and they used to have badges, and then they were taken away. Some of the investigators, and then they got upset because they didn't have badges, so they gave them kind of little round pins that weren't quite badges, and they weren't happy about that, but that's all they get. I don't know if they get to carry guns or all, but it's kind of interesting, I thought. But so that's where they came from. Now, where should they go? Right. One of the things that kind of changed what I was going to talk about was the releasing of the proposed change in definitions, and there's a few different things that it covers, and there's a link. There's one that was posted out in the chat by Von Greenback, and then there's a link in the description to their proposed changes and where you can comment. But kind of the two big ones that I took from it is redefining the firearm, what a receiver is, and then when they talk about ghost guns. And on the face of it, I think if they tried to change the definition, it would end up like bump stocks, because there is a U.S. code that defines what the firearm is, and what they're proposing to change it to does not follow what that code is, and that's why the bump stock ban was reversed, because it didn't follow the definition of a machine gun, and the court said you cannot redefine this. Basically, only Congress can, or the law has to be changed in order to change your definition, and the agency cannot do that. So if they did this, I think it would lose in the courts, but it affects ARs, and then also kind of affects striker fired guns, because not having a hammer, and a hammer is part of the definition, which I had the definition, but I'm not sure where I put the definition. And the ATF, in their reasoning for their changes they want to make, they list in their on the website that basically the law was written before any of these things existed, before the AR-15, before striker fired guns, so they weren't put in the definitions. And if the court would take a broad view of what a gun is, these would fit. Well, sure, but that's not the definition. If you've got a car and then the police say, no, it's a tank now. Well, no, it's not a tank. It doesn't fit the definition of a tank. So what do you think, G-Webs? Will this go anywhere?
We're talking about specifically the new definition.
Yeah.
Redefinition or whatever it's called. I'm just going to look at it. I've heard of it, but I heard that, well, I guess I didn't hear anything specifically. And then there was like some wishy-washiness about whether or not you could leave a comment yet. So I wasn't sure if it was hype or what it was. But now that you've got an actual link to the ATF's website here, I'm just now reading it, and I can see what people are talking about. Like with the brace, I guess, was the last time we all had some experience with this, right between Christmas and Thanksgiving, right before Christmas, I guess. Or wait, was it after Christmas or right before New Year's? But anyway, right at the holidays, they had us go in here to the exact same type of, it's just a different page, but the same part of their website. And it opened right up to the thing. And then what's happening is they've got it all set up, but it's not opening because it's not actually, the mechanism hasn't triggered or whatever yet. So I can see why people are talking about how it's not quite, it's in the process still. It's still being baked. So it's not fully cooked, I guess. But otherwise, I'm just reading it. I agree with what you've said, though, that if they're going to suggest they can redefine something in the law, that's not the same as enforcing the law. So I guess the immediate is we'll have to kick back and watch how they're going to actually try to enforce it. And then I guess we have no other choice but then also wait for one of our three-letter organizations to sue them, I guess, and then the process to go through. Ideally, though, something like this is an opportunity for the community, hopefully somebody in the community to lead the community or to encourage the community to not just observe the process go through like we did with the bump stocks and maybe get loud while we're watching it not happen, but instead be like, hey, let's stop everything and address this. Like, let's put on the brakes and stop this because this isn't something that should happen. You know what I mean? And give everybody an opportunity to work together on something that's somewhere significant. But I don't know if that'll happen either. So I guess your question was, will it go through? I don't know. I'm going to start reading it here. And I guess I'm just saying, I agree with your initial thing there. I'll read it and see if there's anything that changes my mind or whatever. But basically, there's no way they can just say, oh, you know what? This is what a gun is actually.
Yeah, and I swear when I was reading through it that it sounded like if they redefine for like AR-15s, so the upper and lower, and then wanting to serialize uppers, that if you already have an upper, then you need to get it serialized. Is the way they made it sound, but I'm not sure. I was a little kind of confused on it. Um, and there's a bit to go through. So
Oh, wow. It's all over the place. I mean, just reading the summary is not short. And the
yeah,
summary talks about new definitions of the frame or receiver, right?
yeah,
Amend the definition of firearm, amend the definition of gunsmith. I don't know if anybody's explained that or talked about that one. Provide definitions for complete weapon, which is just a definition that never existed. Like that's not a thing. Complete muffler or silencer. Muffler is a new word, and a complete silencer is a new thing. Privately made firearm, new thing. Like out
yeah.
of nowhere, they're making a new thing. And
That's to
then
cover the ghost guns.
yeah, right. Or no, privately made would be an 80 percenter, would
Yeah.
be like you're saying, but I'm saying a 3D printed gun would be a privately made firearm as
Oh
well.
yeah,
So,
yeah. That's right.
so we're just taking a bunch of pipes from Home Depot and making a slam fire shotgun, technically. Anything that you make yourself would be not a manufacturer's made firearm. So that's creating another layer of thing. And then readily for purposes of clarification, blah, blah, blah. So they're going to create a new definition. Well, that's what it just says, provide definitions for these things. Then importers and manufacturers mark. They're going to redefine importers and manufacturers marks, which never existed. Provide a deadline for marking firearms manufactured. I don't know what that could mean. That's scary. Clarify marking requirements for firearms and what they keep now trying to call mufflers. So mufflers and silencers could mean muzzle devices and silencers, could mean brakes and silencers, could mean flash suppressors. You know, what's a muffler? Amend the format because they're about to create a new definition for muffler, right? Amend the format for records. Yeah, this is a whole bunch of stuff beyond just ghost guns. This is, well, it's unreasonable. So it's not going to happen. I mean, that's now that I've read it
Yeah.
all, this is asking for a lot. And they're never going to be able to just do any one of these things, let alone all of them together. So
Yeah.
one thing,
I went to print out um, the everything on the site, and then hit print, and then realized it was 115 pages, which
the read the full summary part.
I was going to print everything and then highlight sections that I wanted, but it was just way too much. But don't let that discourage anybody from going and checking it out. You can scan through, and find relevant parts that you think are important, and look at it so you can see for yourself and not just depend on what I'm saying or what G-Webs is saying, which I might be getting something wrong. So go read it for yourself. Sorry, go ahead, G-Webs. Didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I wasn't saying nothing. I agree with you 100%. This is a great time to be able to watch this kind of stuff because you can all go look at it. And since it's so much, it's so big, everybody's going to have their own angle at it. And then since it's a comment period, whenever it's working, it'll be a comment period. That's going to be an awesome situation because it'll give us all an opportunity to post, our positions. And usually it's concept is you post something about a feeling you have or a point you have about this situation, and since there's so many things they're talking about, obviously you can post something easily, and then if you got another thing to add or you have something to say, and then additionally you can post another comment. So we're talking the opportunity to post multiple comments, and that means the opportunity, like we did before, opportunity for people to read, and then for those comments to be archived. And the political strategists, the people who's tasked with, go determine what the best route is for our political campaign next election. They're going to go use things like this to decide, whoa, like there's no way. These are a bunch of well-reasoned, knowledgeable people with intent. Like we're not going to go against them. Like this is obvious that we had these people sized up all wrong. Let's go complain about there's not enough railings around swimming pools or something else where they're not ready for us. So this is really an opportunity to see the second time. And I have no reason to believe that we're not going to see, because this is affecting all the same people as the braces plus more. So I'm suspecting, I suspect we're going to see a whole bunch of interesting comments when this actually does start working.
I think so. I hope so. The last big comment period, I was really happy to see the involvement there was. How many people got involved? I don't, it was. I won't get into it, but it was good.
Yeah, the last time it was between Christmas and no one saw it coming. So it happened, and they had the comment period for what was it, like a week, or it was some number of days shorter than normal, but even sooner than it was going to, abbreviated time frame. They pulled it down probably because they saw how awesome the comments were, and they were like, "Whoa, this is backfiring on us, right?" But here's the thing: since that happened, right? Since that did happen, and it's in everyone's recent history, they're about to let us do the same thing again. So all the people that are going to wait and watch this time are going to be like, hey, watch me do it this time. So now we're going to have even more participation and more people jumping on board, I would think. At least the opportunity. I would think we're going to see that this time.
Yeah, and even if you don't think you're articulate, just say you're against it. Say something. That's sometimes that'll catch me where I don't know what to say, or I don't say it eloquently, but just being there and saying no, be another voice that they hear.
If it's all some sort of like fancy book writing, then that looks fake. So that was part of what was awesome about it, was how authentic. And a lot of it was like, I work as a truck driver, I work as a cop, or I work as a pilot. It was like those kind of touches. You didn't have to be an expert. You're just telling them, hey, did you know it's affecting nurses? Did you know it's affecting me as a forklift driver?
Yeah. So, get out there and be heard. So going forward, aside from that, the ATF as an organization, does it serve a useful purpose, or are there other agencies that do what they're doing that could do what they're doing? Is the ATF really necessary? I've kind of gone a little bit back and forth. The redefining part that they're doing, no, they shouldn't be doing. But the investigative portion, is that what the FBI does? Could the FBI do it? Fold part of their ATF into the FBI. They have a special special response team that goes after um, high risk law, or they respond to high risk law enforcement operations. Is that something the marshals could do? That's kind of along the lines what they do, go after fugitives and high risk criminals. Or, are they valuable for their when they investigate like bombings and things of that portion or that part? Um, I think there's other organizations that could do most of what they do. So um, I'm not sure if, because they were started basically to enforce taxes. And then as the years went along, their role has changed because Congress would decide, well, we need to take care of this thing. Guns came into it, or tobacco. And so they had to figure out what to do with that. And that was early on when the FBI was started in, what was it, 08, 28, something like that. So there weren't these other, big organizations to take care of this, but now there are. So, should they abolish the ATF? What do you think?
Is that for me or just okay? So I would
Yeah.
think that I think we got the potential, and I think the big picture is that our grandparents' generation was, uh, you know, they were born into giant government and they lived with it, and it stopped world wars and stuff, so they were okay with it. And now there's less need when you've got giant countries, states, or whatever, that nation states that are pretty much borders are figured out. And when people start smashing each other, there's organizations of countries that take care of it. No individual country needs to do all this stuff. So, giant states aren't this, necessary, especially if people aren't afraid of communism and you get a couple of generations away from communism and nobody's afraid of it anymore. So I think our grandkids or whatever, the opposite side, as those older people or who are okay with big government and not afraid of the whatever we call big government and are afraid of communism, and you get the next group who is the opposite of that, not afraid of communism at all, or at least anywhere near as much, and hesitant to the big state. I guess I'm setting all that up to say that with that potential and with as crazy as the politics have been, and again, we're not teaching kids history. If you look at old-fashioned politics, they were heinous and weird and really out of control, honestly. And then it kind of all got pushed under the rug because everybody was embarrassed at how bad it was. Back in there was some really bad stuff in politics in the olden days before TV and everything. So people, when they see that horrible stuff happen in politics, they get a bad taste for it and it goes away. So I think that what we've seen now is a bunch of weird stuff and extremes. And if that pendulum swing goes the other way, and the generations that don't appreciate giant state start to frown on big state and oppressive laws and infringements, and start to look at things like voluntarism and removing barriers as opposed to creating giant infrastructures and bureaucracy, I could see a removal of the laws that create the whole ATF, at least the need for its enforcement and regulation and stuff. And as soon as you get rid of serial numbers and this delusion that somehow if we keep track of every gun, that we're going to stop crime, like that's a bunch of burden on a state. And it's done nothing to even suggest to prove that it's been able to do that any of that concept is actually happening. So anyway, I just think that we got the potential to see a discouragement at big government and the ATF's need to be removed, and then there's no need for the agency. I mean, maybe the explosives part, like you say, gets pushed over onto some other law enforcement division or something, but in this tobacco part, it's really tough, I would think, for the government to keep justifying why, of all the things that they mess with, like alcohol and tobacco are the two that they've decided, as opposed to coffee or marijuana or anything else, aspirin, I don't know, whatever. There's probably a list of things that are comparables there, right? So why just because in the old days, those were the two big vices that they could tax. Again, if people decide big government's not the way to go, I could see it being disbanded. I guess I'm saying a lot of ifs, but we're talking on a hypothetical here, I guess.
Yeah, my only concern is like if you took the ATF and then fold them into the FBI is a very powerful organization right now. And then to fold them into it creates an even larger, more powerful organization that,
If you give them the same burden, but I'm saying if you
yeah,
remove, like, I don't know, background checks, and you remove NICS, and you removed all the monitoring, what should I say, FFLs, so that even if you remove the NFA, I mean, holy moly, then what is even ATF going to do? So what you do give to a FBI is basically the explosives part, which is probably, I don't know, I don't really know. I'm going to say it might be better for them, but
yeah.
I don't know how big a deal explosives really is. Like if it needs its own department or whatever.
Well, in the New York Times article that I read, talked about how they're so backlogged with paperwork that building that they were storing paperwork in, the floor collapsed from the weight of all the papers. And then, and kind of in the article, they talked about streamlining and digitizing everything. So to make a searchable database, which 100% against, because that creates a list, and there should not be a list. But so, what good is all that paperwork? You know, would they've got 20-year-old paperwork? Are you why? What's it do? It was kind of funny that they mentioned that some of the FFLs, when they would have to send all their paperwork in, it would piss on all the paperwork before they sent it in.
Nice. Well, and that'll happen too, even if you were talking about what the ATF agents said.
Yeah.
If ATF agents didn't think about what they're doing, like what they're asking for, they're asking for 20-year-old paperwork. That might have been in an attic or a basement or a shed, and it might have been getting peed on by rats or raccoons or dogs, or you know what I mean? Like that might not have been intentional as much as just like, you really want this stuff? Well, it's been sitting. Here you go. It was underneath the shop for 6 years. Here you go.
Yeah, and then along with the digitizing everything, I think in the rule changes, they want FFLs to keep their paperwork forever instead of the, 20 years? So as long as you're a business, you keep every 4473 for as long as you're a business.
Well, I think it was the 1976 Privacy Act. Whenever a bunch of people, probably who are inventing computers, I suspect, because I'm just gleaning this. I haven't trying to research it all. But something like in the 70s, somebody decided, hey, let's make a thing that says the government can't database us all, and that's why everything's in paper. And that's the worst part of it, is that it's there intentionally to bog the system down, to make it really difficult for any entity to keep track of us and for registry and all the good things that we don't want, right? But then they get to cry at it and they go, oh, there's paperwork. Oh, it takes forever. Oh, we should streamline this for the children, or we should streamline this for the efficiency. And then the problem is that they were like, in the first place, they were like, hey, what would be great? What would solve crime? Having a bunch of paperwork. Let's make all this bureaucratic garbage that is going to end crime. And no one said sunset yet, so they were like, no. Like, oh no, let's do it. So eventually they were like, all right, we're going to do it, and this is going to end crime, right? Yeah, we're going to end crime, no problem. And then it just became this bureaucratic mess, right? And we say, I'd like to think, I haven't seen any real push to say, what's the 4473 even here for? Why do we need to license firearms? Where are these serial numbers helping anything? You can't do XYZ, so why do we need to ABC over here? None of that's really been challenged, but we could be challenging them all on all of that, and they couldn't justify any of it, because all they ever do now is go, it's not enough. It's not enough. this isn't working, we need more. This isn't working, we need more. You got serial numbers on all your guns, but wouldn't it be easier if all the guns were in these drawers that only had keys that these people had? You know, like, wouldn't it be better if all the guns were over here? You know, they're going to keep doing whatever they want. And I guess that's my problem, is that they're unchecked. We should be pushing against some of this stuff, and then the ATF is less and less necessary as, you know, we successfully, like I said, you get rid of NICS, you get rid of a burden on ATF and FBI. But mainly when you're talking the paperwork, crushing the floors, there is 4473s that have to be kept, but there's also the, you know, the Form 1s and Form 4s for the NFA items.
Yeah.
And those items, from what I've seen glimpses of the place in West Virginia, I've been outside of that building, but I've seen glimpses of the inside from articles and things. And those forms are in sort of like effectively milk crates, right? Made out of paper or something, that they scoot them around in. And depending on how efficient they are, how many people they got going, those things are lining the hallways, and they're just in big piles, and they've got some system to them. But, you know, they're definitely overwhelmed with all these pieces of paper. Now, they do have electronic versions of that too, and the pictures I've seen are old, but that's potentially, I don't think they throw those pieces of paper away. So if they were burdened processing those, they must be overwhelmed with archiving those as well. So,
well, there are people who scan paperwork. That's what they're doing now, is running everything so they can digitize it.
I could see them scanning like a Form 1 or a Form 4, because I don't remember. What am I trying to think? I'm trying to think. If you put in a Form 4, what do they keep a copy of it? I don't know what they do. They give it back to you, though, I guess, because you get it back with a stamp. So I don't know. But if they're scanning 4473s, then that's a ripoff, because what is that even helping them? If they knew every gun and who owned every gun and where every gun was, and somehow, you know, they had Google technology and they could just scan every 4473 and nobody had transferred a gun otherwise, and they just knew, what would that do? Like, would that solve crime? Would that give them the ability to research anything? No, it would just give them a bunch of data that they'd have trouble dealing with. Even if they could deal with it without any issue, what are they going to do with that data? It doesn't tell them anything, you know, about who's going to get mad or what's going to happen or who has to defend themselves. So, yeah, that's, I don't know.
Well, and then if you get into like the California wants to do with micro stamping, so you're stamping everything. So then you've got the numbers for all that. In the rule changes, they talk about with suppressors, if it's a single piece suppressor, the one that doesn't come apart, then you've got a number for the can, you know. But if it comes apart, then you're numbering every piece. So if it's got the cone baffles, where it's a stack of cones, each one of those cones have to be numbered and tracked and traced, and
separately or like serialized together.
Well,
so each.
The way it sounded, like each would have an I don't know if it was the same number or individual numbers, but that's, you know, that's a group of numbers basically.
Yeah, like 005-1-2-3, so that you couldn't just like interchange baffles or like have an extra baffle or lose a baffle or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Which, how does that help?
No, again, it shows that it should be an indication that, you know, that you should be able to look, and that's what I'm suggesting, is that when you go forward, like our grandparents never paid attention to this stuff. They called them lawmakers. They hired them to do the lawmaking. But you got skeptical grandkids who are looking at a law like that, and they're like, are you ridiculous? Like, what are you trying to pull here? What would that ever do? And why would anyone suggest that this is good bureaucracy? How about you're all fired? And if that's the result, then you start, you know, instead of the answer being, oh yeah, yes or no on this particular facet of the thing, instead it's like, hey, how about you are out of office, and anybody who even considers stuff like this is never getting hired again? Then you see politicians pivot on a dime, and all of a sudden politicians are all about, hey, let's not bother people and let's get away from all this and let's start disassembling some of this stuff. And that can happen quick once they are motivated to do it. And once their constituency is like, yep, that's what we're looking for, do more of that. So I guess I like to think that's a potential, at least. It's
a potential, but Well, I don't want to get too far into
Well, I'm just saying when it
politics
gets this
side.
when it gets this extreme, that's the pendulum's got to swing, and what causes it to swing? If it's a gentle, then it just kind of gets if they take little nibbles, it's easy to see the increments take forever. But when they take big bites like this, it's just going to be tough. Like I was just saying, with every single baffle being serialized separately, it's just such an unnecessary thing. And the kids that are 3D printing cans now, you can form a can and 3D print it, right? And then they're going to tell you it's a bunch of extra stuff and you can't 3D print a new baffle on a plastic thing that is going to dispose. It's just dumb. It's like, again, I think it's a potential, I guess where I started the whole thing is it's a potential to if the constituency wanted to hold that, to shine a light at that and say, how could you even suggest legislation like this? You don't know anything about the mechanisms. You don't know anything about how we use them or what you're trying to do. This shows that you're a bad, legislate. You've created bad legislation here. And even if you don't do what I'd like to see, remove them from office. If there's enough light being shown on the horrible legislation, then they're going to quit offering the horrible legislation, or at least quit holding it up as like, the thing that should be done. Like Biden's able to hold this stuff up as like, this is great ideas because no one's challenging them on it. But I guess I'm saying that I don't see the future generations just sitting by and allowing it to be unchallenged.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know, because you hear people say like the Gen Z and the generation is more conservative, which I'm not sure if they're more conservative, honestly. Just because I don't know if you want to say the Overton window has shifted so far. So,
Right. Right. If they call themselves conservative, it's not what we call conservative.
Yeah, it's like looking at England. English conservatives are kind of Democrats in the U.S. There's no real conservatism in England. But yeah, I think part of the problem is the government is very good at saying, look at this, what I can give you. Don't worry about that over there. And a lot of people worry about what they can get rather than what's going on. If that makes sense.
No, I hear you. And that's definitely the overwhelming norm, like the way that it goes. I just like to think that with this kind of stuff, with such crazy, because now that I'm looking at it, there's just so much crazy stuff in here that
Yeah.
I'm just hoping to bit off more than they can chew. And I really don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I'm hoping, I guess the question was about the ATF. I'm hoping that stuff like this kind of gets people to be way more skeptical about why we need that thing. I mean, of all the people he's going to suggest to be the lead of it, he picks a guy who, like, an unphotoshopped picture of the guy standing in front of a carcass. That's horrible. Like, holy moly.
Yeah, I think they can defeat that him
The
and keep
nomination.
him. Yeah, just based on stuff like that.
And I've just seen, without even people trying hard, like just bringing up so much of that guy because he's been around and you could tell he's been groomed by Obama or whatever. But I don't think whenever they were getting him ready to do this job, it was before there was like a sarcasm level and memes on the internet and like an ability to pull stuff up out of people's past like that. Because there's, like I say, there's just so much stuff I've seen on this guy already, and I don't think people are trying real hard yet. He's not really nothing more than just the first nomination.
Yeah, and I had heard he was at Ruby Ridge, but I haven't really been able to verify if he was or not. If that was true, that's another nail in the coffin for him, I think.
Yep, exactly.
But so Mad Sexy wants to know what everyone should start doing other than storming buildings and stupid nonsense. I think just start. You can start small. Talk to people you know. I'd like the comment period is open. Leave a comment. Be respectful. because I think anything, if it's just one long stream of F words, it's going to get ignored. Um, but you don't have to do anything big to start making a change, I don't think. You can start small, talking to people talk to a neighbor. If there's a rally, go to a rally. Comment period, leave a comment. Just stuff like that I think can make a difference. So what do you think, G-Webs?
Yep. I think that depending on who's listening to this, if you're older than some age or if you're younger than whatever age that is, start, yeah. But I guess the other thing I would say is to start realizing that it isn't a finish line, because this is a cycle, and this is wherever we're at on the cycle, on the wave, it's a repetitive sequence, and sticking around as an older folk, somebody who's older than whatever age, is stick with it. And again, don't assume that you're going to pass a finish line or break a ribbon, and that there's going to be black eyes as well as victory parties. And as an older folk, that. So try to offer that to the younger folks, and the younger folks, just don't get burnt out, because you're going to want to give it your all. And I'm not just age, but level of interest into this. Some people I've met who are older and get into 2A or get into gun issues, or any issue, I suppose, and then just get into it. They're enthusiastic about it. They know we're on the right side of this whole thing. They know there's valid fights, and they get burnt out at some point, or they just get done. And that's the frustrating part, because the young ones that get frustrated are just gone or whatever, and the older ones, same thing, they're just gone or whatever. But I think there might be some connection there. So that's, I guess, I don't know if it's actually the answer to how to start, but start realizing that it isn't an answer as much as a lifestyle. A long way of saying it.
Yeah, I agree. And then, as always, vote. Get out there and vote. A lot of people don't think their vote matters, and you may not win. The person you want may not win, but if they can garner a lot of support, maybe they'll win the next time, or someone else will pick up the mantle who believes along the same lines, and maybe they can win. Because if you throw up your hands and you give up, then nothing's going to change.
Is it like building a barn? When you get one of those situations where a bunch of people show up to build a barn, you might be like, I'm too old to build a barn, or I'm too young to build a barn, or I don't have the whatever to build the barn myself, whatever. But when a bunch of people show up, and then it just starts happening, then everybody starts to see where their place is or whatever, and then ideally everybody's gets to contribute their piece to it or whatever. And then when you're all done, there's just another barn to do next weekend. Right? It's not like you built the barn and you're done. Everybody goes inside the barn and lives. Some horses are going to go in there, and everybody's going to build another barn soon, right? Hopefully you just get to where you build that barn and you figure out that, again, it's not like, once you finish that one barn, it's over. So you're passing that process on, and the old folks can make lemonade and tell you how you shouldn't be doing something, and the young folks will be up there doing it anyway till they break it in front of everybody, and then the whole generation will know you shouldn't do that. It'll be common knowledge, that kind of stuff. Like the tradition gets carried on, the willingness and the accomplishment gets traveled on, even though everybody doesn't have to experience everything. Does that make sense? So I think that's what we've got, and we've got the internet to help us with that. And I think that's one of the reasons we saw just such weak. I keep saying this is weak attacks on us at this point. These are not onslaughts. They could be doing so much more, and this is like just really just throwing us. What's the words? Just barely fighting us.
Yeah.
This would have been so much more dangerous if it just would have been to change the definition of a frame. That could have been deadly to the AR-15. But when you throw it in there with like 1,000 other poison pills, there's just no one's ever going to take a whole bottle of poison pills. You take and say, hey, here's some Flintstone vitamins. You put one poison pill in there. we would have maybe ate it. You know, there's this just like, hey, here's a bottle of poison. You want to take it all and eat every one of them?
That's that's honestly what I was thinking when you're talking about it earlier. Is I realized if they had limited to one, maybe two things, um, they might be able to push it through. But trying to shotgun all this stuff, it's
It's like they're phoning it in. It's like a joke. It's like, hey, guess what? Like it's like, hey, if nobody's paying attention and you're on our side, look it, we're going for the Hail Mary. We're trying to do it all. Oh, they didn't let us. Dang it. We really gave it our all. And then on our side, we're like, come on, man. Like it looks like they're playing volleyball here. Like looks like we're, like the NRA can just say no, and then the NRA gets to go, haha, we defeated all of this in one sweep. I'm not picking on the NRA. I should say, the pro gun side gets to come up and say, hey, we defeated this. You gave us such an easy target. Of course we're going to defeat it. It's ridiculous.
yeah. So I don't know. We probably didn't um, answer all the questions or solve all the problems with the NFA, but it was just kind of, I had come across an article and it got me thinking. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought about it and thought it would be good discussion. It could be honestly 3-4 hour chat, if we went deep into it, but just something to get people to think about. So hopefully it did that. And then if you're watching this in replay, leave the comments. Anything that you thought I missed or left out, go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know. Because other people read the comments too, and it can kind of keep the conversation going. But at that, you have any parting words, G-Webs?
You got a couple of more comments coming up after the last one you put up there. Second, yeah.
Well, you can't lose heart even though you're in California, because it's kind of like Washington, where if you look at the voting base, it'll be small concentrations in large cities will be kind of the liberal sections, and then the rest of the state will be more conservative. And I'm not saying everybody has to be conservative, but that's just to generalize to make it easier to picture. So it's not the entire state, it's not everybody, it's just enough in a concentrated area where it swings the vote. But there's still other things you can vote on, your local level. So just don't lose heart.
I throw in on that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I definitely listen to a lot of the younger stuff, or at least the newer stuff, because that's what I'm about to say with apes there in a second too, is that it's easy when you're old to think of everybody who's young as the next or the new or whatever, but there can be, at least from my perspective or experience with this stuff, there can be just as many old people who are just getting into something. So they're new to it, just like an inexperienced young person, right? Even though they're experienced and they've got lots of life under their belt, they're just not new to, they're new to the whatever, the community or the hobby or whatever, in this case, guns or 2A. So when you talk about the next generation not wanting to listen, and that's basically the same question or the same answer to apes thing there. I think that when you're new to 2A, and that would probably be the same thing as if you're new to, like, I don't know, saving the whales, or if you're new to like petitioning anything, right? You're going to find out that something is unjust, or in this case, we're getting infringed on, right? And then you're going to be like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And you're going to find out there's other people who feel the same way. And then there's maybe even organizations or projects or things happening. So you're going to get involved, and you're either going to get involved with a win and you're going to be like, yeah, this is great. Let's keep doing it. You're going to double down and get involved, and maybe at a time when there's winning. So it's not like necessarily just one instance, but, you're at a time when there's momentum and it's like fair weather, oh, it's easy to be a fan right now. But now let's say you get all those circumstances happen and you're at a time when we're losing. Well, then it might be really frustrating. And at those times, people might leave guns or leave 2A, right? Go someplace else, do something else, or just not be a fighter, just be an observer. And that's where I think the idea that the next group coming up won't want to listen. I think it's just, it's just different. If you're at a time when there's winning, you're going to find a lot of people are listening and it's not an issue. But when there's a time when we're not winning, or there's a time when you just have a lot of people who are new to the fight, when you're fighting, in this case, politically or whatever, or so in culture, we're going to have to take black eyes, and people take black eyes in different ways. If you work somewhere and you can't be a gun owner where you work, that's different than if you don't have that issue. So everyone's going to deal with the fight in a different way. So I think that the answer to the next generation not listening is more like there are some gun owners or some 2A activists that are not interested in like adapting or learning or doing whatever might be necessary to move on. But there's a whole bunch that are, and that's all I was going to get at. I guess it's another long way of saying I hear what you're saying, but I really think that there's a whole bunch of creative, interesting stuff. And once you start looking at things like the 3D printing and some of the other facets of 2A that are new, it's going to be really tough for the antis to even keep up, let alone our side be aware of all the good stuff that's happening. So that's the other side of it, is that you might not have experienced people that are super positive and winning, but there are so many people out there that just know that there's going to be just as many people winning as losing. So just because you're not seeing them doesn't mean they're not out there. I'm not saying they're going to win it for us, but there are wins out there.
Yeah. And I think to address Fine Ape here, I think the shotgun approach was mainly because Biden said, I want you to do this, this, and this in his not executive order, the executive other thing, I can't think of the name, which told that agency to do this. So they said, all right, we're going to do this. And they did everything all at once. I think that's probably why. That's my guess.
And I just wanted to say, I don't know if it's the mentality of the young generation. I was just saying, I think it's just wherever you're at in the game. Some people are like, oh, I really like shooting, I've just got into it. Wait, what? You're trying to infringe on it. And other people are like, oh, I just got into shooting. Wait, what? There's rules against it? I'll just get into motorcycles, or I'll just go buy a guitar. Like some people just aren't into it as the same way as other people.
Yeah.
And I guess at any age, you could be young and you could be old and have the same attitude.
Yeah, that's true. So we're gonna shut it down because I like to keep these at about an hour. I don't want to go too long. Just because makes it easier to digest and replay. But I want to thank you, G-Webs, for joining me. Made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah, glad to jump in. Glad to keep rambling. I ramble easy.
And thank everybody that's been out in the chat chatting. Mad Sexy, Fine Ape, Andrew. And Andrew, I'll get that stuff mailed out next week. And you don't have to send me anything for shipping. It's on me. Mandatory carry coming in at the end here. Glad you were able to show up. And Baron, I appreciate you out there chatting it up. 2 Live Move if you're still awake or still sober. And so if I happen,
well, you want to wrap it up?
If I happen to miss anybody, I'm sorry. I think I got everybody. Um, so um, it is now officially Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day. And whether your mother's here or not, um, it's a day to think about them. Um, do something nice for them, whether it's get them flowers or just leave them alone. Um, enjoy the rest of your day.